The views expressed on this show by guests and the host on issues outside of the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence are the opinions of those individuals alone and do not necessarily reflect those of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of 9/11 Freefall, and we're going to have a special one tonight. As you may or may not know, we've been covering this for a very long time. The family of Geoff Campbell, right there behind me on the screen, has been pursuing a new inquest, and there's been some new developments in that entire affair. So we're going to have Matt Campbell on here to talk about it. Matt is the brother of Geoff Campbell, who tragically died at the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001. His family's push for a new inquest into Geoff's death has been followed on this show, and the first step of that journey was documented in our film, The Unspeakable, produced by AE 9/11 Truth. Today, Matt is going to talk about these latest developments, as I said, in this push for a new inquest and how our supporters can help his family on the next leg of the journey. So let's go ahead and bring him on in here. Matt, welcome back to 9/11 Freefall.
Hey, Andy. Hi. Good to be back.
All right. So I'm always cognizant of the fact that we're picking up new viewers. There may be somebody that can help you guys out that is unaware of this entire situation, and this is their first exposure to it by chance. So please, it's been a long journey, but please just reiterate for our audience about Geoff, who he was, the life that was lost that day.
Yeah, so my brother Geoff was 31. He didn't normally work in the World Trade Center. He only started working for Reuters, which were based up in Midtown a couple of years before. And he was there attending that conference like a lot of the other British victims were. It was a British firm. And it's just one of those things. He was, unfortunately there. I started questioning 9/11 within a couple of months, just certain aspects of the official narrative. And fast forward to 2013 when he had his first inquest, which we can go into details as to why he had that. I've been fighting ever since to try and get his inquest into his death, the cause of his death, reopened now for, pushing over 10 years.
I can't imagine being in your shoes, first of all, losing your brother in this big public event that, to me, it seems almost like more difficult, the fact that it was so public and on television, and then to learn the information, of course, that AE 9/11 Truth has put forward, that we've been lied to about how these three towers came down on that day, and trying to get some action on this, some acknowledgement of what really happened, since it so concerns your family so deeply. Let's get into the first inquest. Remind our audience, first of all, what that is, in case they're not familiar with that term, how this system works, and then we'll get into the need for a new one.
Yeah, so when someone dies in suspicious circumstances or suddenly, and obviously clearly in a murder, there's an inquest that takes place. That's held by a coroner, and the idea is what they're supposed to do is look into who died, where they were, when they died, and more importantly, how they came about their death. And my brother actually had a joint inquest along with 9 of the victims. They'd all had their remains repatriated back from the States to the UK. By law, that triggers an inquest if remains are repatriated back to the UK. And they basically had a very, I'd say it's a rubber stamp kind of affair, in terms of it was all over and done, just over an hour and a half. They spent about 3 minutes discussing my brother's life and death. And there really was no investigation into how those 10 individuals died, including my brother. I mean, just no inquiry at all. It just, for me, by law, they're supposed to do some sort of investigation. That's the whole point of it. Otherwise, why bother holding the inquiry in the first place? And they didn't. And so, I've been determined to try and get my brother's inquest reopened. Because there was no inquiry in the first place as to what caused his death. And secondly, because there is abundant evidence of the use of explosives and incendiaries, I want that placed into a court where, as they're supposed to do, look at all the facts and objectively determine how someone died. So, I mean, that's why I've been on this mission now for, over 10 years trying to do this.
Right. And it's a great open door opportunity for the issue of controlled demolition. God knows we've been trying to get acknowledgement here in the United States. We're going to be going over some of the things from what was written on your crowdfunder page, because this seems like such a huge miscarriage of justice. And it really shines a light on how just screwy, for lack of a better word, Western justice really is. It's almost like, well, the Met Police didn't say there was anything to it, so we're not going to either. We'll get into that. I got other questions. But so in the Unspeakable, we document some of this, first steps in pursuing justice. Talk about the work that was involved in basically, getting the barrister and pursuing this new inquest. Was it difficult to find somebody to represent you in this, given how controversial the entire issue is?
I mean, no, surprisingly not. I, through an next door neighbor who actually babysat my kids, who went on to study law, I asked her, just thinking, she'll give me an honest answer, which chambers did she think would be suitable to handle the kind of case that we had. And she gave the names of 2 chambers. And I just, basically looked at their website, looked at the profiles of the people and what they'd done, and contacted, a couple of barristers. And this is back in 2015. I mean, just initial foray into, okay, what's needed, what's required, etc. And yeah, I mean, what was documented in the film The Unspeakable was the results of a year's long effort to put together this application with the barrister, where you're not just putting forward the evidence, you're putting forward all the legal arguments as to why we should have this inquest reopened. Typical way in which lawyers do. They cite case precedents, etc. Not specifically to do with the evidence that we had, but similar, and reasons why insufficiency of inquiry, here's new evidence, a new inquest should be granted by the Attorney General. And so the documentary really just captured those initial steps right up to the actual submission of the 2,500 page application, which was done in August 2021. Seems ages ago. That was actually when we submitted the application.
Right. And I remember watching that film, the final version of that. And I mean, I knew good things were to follow. And the thing is, people tend to mark success based off of what the outcome is of the cases. But the fact that you are drawing this much attention or getting any attention on this issue at all, I measure as a win for the 9/11 truth movement, because the best way to bring down dictators is to make them act like one, make them make these unreasonable arguments that I'm seeing laid out here. So I just want to tell our audience, we're helping the Campbell family raise the money they need to appeal the latest decision, which we'll be getting into the details of in just a few moments here. But we're going to have a special link in the bulletin that you're receiving and on our page where you can do that. The money is going to go directly to the Campbell family so that they can put it towards their legal fund. They need to raise it by a deadline. I believe it's March the 1st, right, Matt?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess we're getting ahead of ourselves in terms of,
right,
why we're having to go through this judicial review process and raise the funds.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, we have 2 deadlines. So we can kind of backtrack a little bit, but I mean, essentially we have a 3rd of April absolute deadline to apply for a judicial review in the High Court. If we miss that, that's it. We have no other recourse to challenge what the Attorney General has decided for the second time, which is to deny us a new inquest. In terms of raising funds, because obviously we need to raise the funds, and then we need to actually get the barrister to do the work in order to submit and hit that 3rd of April deadline. We're really talking, March 1st, end of the first week in March is our absolute, cut-off point. We won't be able to get the work done in time and submit, in terms of filing at the High Court if we don't raise the funds by then, which isn't very far away.
Right. It doesn't take. Yeah, it takes more than a night to take on something this big. So the reason I'm bringing this up right now is that while the audience is listening to this show, you can go to the page link we have provided you, look over what the Campbell family has written, and should be a widget there where you can donate directly to them. It's a lot of money to do these kinds of things, but nothing that is important ever gets done in an easy or cheap manner in this world. That's where we turn to the 9/11 Truth Movement and the great people in it. All right, so you've been looking for, trying to get this new inquest into Geoff's death. Obviously, the ramifications, if we get this, are going to be huge. If they have to acknowledge controlled demolition, that opens up a big can of worms for the Western world. Even though it would be in the UK, it would still have an impact here in the United States. That a court basically said this, that they acknowledged that Geoff's death was as a result of pre-planted explosives put inside the buildings. Now, I read earlier this year, the request for a new inquest was denied, but then the decision was reversed. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so if we go back to when the first application was put in August 2021, they sat on it for 22 months, ridiculous amount of time, given it was pretty clear cut with what we'd submitted that, they should have granted a new application, a new inquest. So in June last year, they came back with a first denial. It was a very brief letter. They basically made some irrational and unlawful statements. They certainly hadn't applied the law in which they're supposed to objectively do, and when looking at what we had, submitted to them, and once they made that decision, again, we were time constrained. We had 3 months to raise the funds for judicial review to go and challenge what the Attorney General had decided. And we managed to do that. We put together substantive grounds, like it was effectively the whole case, which we basically had to give to the Attorney General, which you do before. It's like a warning shot. We are going to litigate against you. Here's our grounds. And it gives them an opportunity to back down, basically, and do the right thing. So rather surprisingly, and in some ways it was a success, they actually backed down. They withdrew their unlawful, irrational decision of June 2023. And then unfortunately, although it's within their rights, they basically are allowed to make a fresh decision. So, okay, we didn't file, we didn't actually have to challenge them in court because they had withdrawn that unlawful, irrational decision. So, beginning of October now, we're talking last year, they are in theory looking at our application again, looking at reasons why we've given we should have a new inquest reopened. And they sat on it. And again, we were thinking, is this going to be another, a year-long wait, etc. Anyway, beginning of this year in January, they got back to us again with a second denial, with kind of similar but different reasons, but still as irrational and unlawful. They're still not applying the legal tests, and we can go into a little bit of why they are so wrong in the way that they've made their decision. But like I said, again, we have this only recourse, which is judicial review. Now, it's almost unheard of that an Attorney General would reverse and withdraw their decision, I should say, in the first place. To do 2 denials is obviously equally rare. This time round, I can't, they're either going to back down and give us the decision we need, or they will take it to court. But, I'm convinced that when we put together the case, given we already know that the key points we're going to attack, they're going to do what they did last September, which is we're going to lose. And so, you know, unless they're going to permanently keep pushing, kicking the can down the road, and acting in a very unlawful, you know, not the way that you'd expect, you know, the Attorney General to behave, they're going to have no choice but to capitulate. That's what we're hoping, obviously. But I said, you know, we have this finite 3 months to do this action, which seems grossly unfair since they had 22 months to just sit on it and, you know, come up with that first denial.
Incredibly unfair. It's ridiculous. For ordinary citizens, people who don't have the money of big corporations and government to have to, first of all, do their job for them. Reminds me when I was going to a congressman's office to talk about controlled demolition evidence. I'm getting a haircut and buying a tie, and I'm like, my God, I'm acting like I'm going on a job interview to go ask a guy to do his job that we sent him to office to do. But this is where we are. So, yeah, they only give you 3 months after they take 22 months to deal with this. My question is, let's say we get the money, you can file the necessary paperwork to challenge this. How long can they kick the can down the road? I mean, is this going to be a make or break thing, or could they keep on kicking it down the road for the next 10 years?
Should we be granted judicial review and the High Court they will set a date? In my understanding is actually, again, there are certain timeframes that then kick in. So once we actually get into the High Court, they can't kick this down the road forever. You know, we will have that hearing actually in the High Court. I mean, that's another chunk of work. It's not a trivial thing to go and do that. But after that point, supposing we do actually win in the High Court and they side with us and say, yep, the Attorney General erred in their decision, we will quash the original inquest and open a new one. That's the unknown bit as to how long it would take a coroner's court to be handed that case. You know, there's no reason why it should be years and years, but it certainly won't be. You know, it won't be within sort of 6 months. So there are some unknowns, but no, in theory, once we actually file, it's in the system, and there are, you know, a time frame that both parties have to work to. So when we do something, they have to respond within 2 weeks, and vice versa. So you know, things will move quickly should we actually be granted the judicial review. It's a painful process, and you pointed out, you know, the costs. It's all part of what, you know, they call lawfare. They're trying to exhaust us, you know, energy wise, time frame wise. You know, I mean, I'm relatively young, I guess, but you know, the other thing they attack you with is they know it costs a lot of money. I mean, judicial review is probably the most expensive thing you can do in the UK in terms of what challenging stuff in court. It's not a cheap process, and that's, I think, one of the tactics they're using. You know, the inquest itself it's relatively limited in scope, as in it only looks at the cause of death. But you know, that's looking at causative factors, you know, the towers being demolished, etc. So it's not like that. We're not like opening up the entire case. It's quite specific, but I think it's enough for them to be scared. And, you know, they're doing all they can within their power, abusing that power to effectively prevent us from doing what they can't have, which is, you know, in particular, victim family members, someone actually related to the deceased, getting this evidence into court and challenging an official narrative. I think that's something they're going to try and avoid at all costs. And I'm just hoping that we can use the system against them, overcome all these obstacles, because once it's in a court, they can't hide. It's hard to actually hide. All they're doing at the moment is playing the usual lawfare games and pre actual litigation games. You know, which is why it's important to keep pushing and getting through actually into a court, because it's harder for them to hide behind the kind of language that they use in the responses. I don't know if you've seen the actual responses that the Attorney General gave. I mean, they are absolutely pathetic. They're irrational and unlawful.
Well, yeah, and I saw this in your write-up. We're going to talk about, because I was shaking my head reading some of these things that you cite here in your statement. But no, this is absolutely what they're doing. And, you know, I talk about this on another show we did this week, The Focus, about how often certain special interests and such will want more regulations, more rules on an industry because they can afford to hire the lawyers and the clerks and everybody to do these things, while their competition, which may not be as rich as them, can't do that, and it strangles them out. Well, the same thing happens here when it comes to challenging official narratives. This is why big groups like AE 9/11 Truth, which can appeal to supporters and raise funds, this is why they're under attack, because they don't want this kind of organization. They don't want us to be able to put Matt here on the show and appeal to people and have them, $50 here, $100 there, contribute to this fund. They're hoping that the Campbell family just quits and goes away. And of course, we don't want them to. We want them to carry this to the final conclusion. Make them do everything that they can. When I say them, I'm talking about the system, the government system, that make them do everything they can to try to quash this so that they reveal themselves. So history knows exactly what the people of this world had to deal with in trying to get justice for the nearly 3,000 who died. I have on the graphic behind me, it says justice for Geoff, and absolutely, but it's justice for everybody, even for the people whose families have not even thought about this in the 20 years since it happened, have not questioned 9/11. Those people deserve justice too. Everybody deserves the right to know exactly how their loved ones died. So it's really justice for all the victims of that terrible day. And thank God the Campbell family has the guts and the fortitude to carry this forward. All right, so there's a lot of things I picked out of your statement that we're going to zero in on, but you talked about some of the ridiculous reasons they cited for denying this. Just give an overview of that before we zero in on the specifics. Why? How can they throw this out?
Why? Say again, sorry. Why they?
How can they throw this out? What was the overall general argument that they made for why they don't want a new inquest?
Well, I think you just used the word that they speak in very general terms. They specifically avoid engaging with any of the evidence or arguments that you put forward, because by doing that in their denial or refusal of permission letter, they would open themselves up to us then addressing the reasons as to why they've given that we aren't able to, they won't grant permission to reopen the inquest. They, in general, are deferring to documents that were either not in front of the coroner at the first inquest. So you can't refer to another report saying, oh, it's all over in there. No, it wasn't in front of the coroner. There was no inquiry. And more importantly, the documents they refer to don't actually address any of the new evidence that we put in front of them. So whether they're citing the 9/11 Commission report or the NIST reports themselves, they don't address our evidence. Which is it's a peculiar situation. They dismiss eyewitness testimony, and you probably know yourself that a lot of those were first responders. One was a police officer. And to just dismiss that and say that they're not credible in the same breath of saying that our expert witnesses and their testimony and the eyewitnesses aren't credible, they also say, but we're not going to bother engaging our own experts to look at the evidence. And they're just, they are using very general terms. They're not addressing specifically. They're supposed to, if they're going to give grounds for refusal and say, this evidence isn't, strong enough X, Y, Z, they are supposed to give reasons why. And they haven't. They just use dismissive language. And it's the telltale kind of, it's just a trick that we can see that they're using. It's so obvious. But like I said, what we did last September in that first judicial review process was we countered all their lack of arguments and just ripped them apart, to the extent that clearly they looked at it and went, we're going to lose. And that's why they withdrew that first decision. So the mind boggles, the second time round, it's more of the same, but it's just worse. I think they did it in the first letter, the first response last year, and in this one as well. And they refer to, they referred to the the Metropolitan Police report, which, you know, at the time when we first did this the application back in 2021, we didn't have this this report, and that's the front cover from it. I don't know if you can see it. There. It was something called Operation Exchange. It was a report prepared by SO15, which is the counterterrorism group in the UK. I couldn't get hold of it. I tried to get it through free information request from the detective that actually read out the evidence from the coroner's court, etc. It was exempt from disclosure. So I really thought, you know, this evidence that they also cited in their response letter was, you know, going to be, you know, worthwhile, exciting, some real information. But anyway, through the process, once we'd actually filed in 2021, I guess probably because we were working with a barrister, they handed over this report. And so, you know, quite excited about reading it, thinking, okay, we're actually going to see what was done in terms of an investigation by the UK authorities. It's nothing but an executive summary, 1 page, 2 pages of a timeline that's almost cut and paste from the 9/11 Commission report. And that's it. There's no looking at how my brother died or, you know, reasons why the towers collapsed. And then they also have the audacity to cite the FBI investigation as a reason why, you know, we're not going to let this, we're not going to give you permission to reopen your brother's inquest. But that FBI investigation, what's summarized in that report, is a single page, and it covers the Zacharias Masui trial, which has nothing to do with my brother's death, nothing to do with the World Trade Center at all. And so you've just got this situation where in both letters, but, you know, let's just, even we talk about the most recent one, they just defer to documents, reports that have nothing to do with my brother's death. They just don't address it at all, and they don't address our new evidence. That's the tactic that they're basically employing. And like I said, again, they're refusing to engage with the evidence because they know if they do that, we've got them. Because we can argue against their specific arguments, are very hard to make. I mean, one of the points that I remember making over the years is, you know, the threshold that we have to provide in terms of new evidence and reasons for the grounds of insufficient inquiry. The bar is so low. I mean, you know, we are so far above that. I mean, it should be really straightforward. It should be one of those things, you know, Attorney General, the office, they receive the application, they go, right, no question, that's on the approved pile. You know, we're talking like a couple of days max, it should have been, in terms of, you know, making that decision, because it's so obvious. Our barrister is an assistant coroner. I chose him because he's been involved with lots of inquests. And, you know, he was of the opinion right from day one, had no idea, obviously, this evidence existed, was kind of appalled that no inquiry was made whatsoever into how 10 people died, which is, it's the role of a coroner. That's the role of the function of the inquest. So, yeah, it's just crazy. So in general, they avoid any specific detail because that's the only way they can kind of, and they're not even really defending their decision. That's just the kind of language they're using because it's the only defense they can have.
Right. And I mean, this is, I wish this was shocking to me. I really do. But it's been a long time I've been doing this. This is the general strategy. We've been facing it here in the United States. You ask congressmen live on TV about Building 7, and they refer to the 9/11 Commission report, which really didn't even cover the scientific aspects of the tower collapse. So right there, you know, they don't even know what they're talking about. I mean, we've basically run by a government of frat boys being handed cue cards. It's so phony. And we've seen this in our challenges to NIST. I mean, in fact, we're going to the Supreme Court because there was a ruling that said that government agency reports, unless Congress specifically states you have to be accurate, which I didn't think they needed to state, unless they specifically say you have to be accurate, that the government agency reports don't have to be scientifically sound or accurate. Now, I'm not a lawyer. You might want to run that one by your barrister in your case. But see, in your case, they're relying on the NIST reports. And here we have our courts saying that, well, yeah, NIST, they're not even saying whether NIST got anything wrong. Of course they got things wrong, and that's why NIST can't address it. But they're saying, well, our agency reports don't have to be accurate. Well, the problem is courts around the world are relying on our agency reports and making their own rulings. So, yes, they do have to be accurate. So we're going to see what happens at the Supreme Court. I got some plans in case that doesn't go our way, but I don't see why it shouldn't go our way. But here you can see the ripple effect going across the pond into the UK, affecting Geoff's case. It affects Geoff's case because they do mention the reports by NIST, as you cited in your statement here. So let me just, I'm going to read directly from your statement. You wrote, in response to our claim that there was an insufficiency of inquiry, the Attorney General's new decision asserts that it was reasonable for the coroner to rely on the evidence presented by the Metropolitan Police. Now, I highlighted this because, it seems like, is it trying to claim that it can only rely on evidence supplied by the Met Police? Can it really just exclude any other evidence from other sources that are given to it? Can you explain this to me and to our audience, what the statement means, to your own understanding?
I mean, all the coroner could do is be aware of what her job was at the time, which I said is to ascertain how someone came about their death. It has to be put in front of them, So we know that all they had was, because we finally got hold of the report, all they had was this report by the Metropolitan Police, and so for them to reassert that, it's what do they say? It was reasonable for the coroner to rely on the evidence presented by the Met Police. It was a cut and paste job. It really just had the timeline of the planes taking off, when they were hijacked, and the impacts in the towers, and when the towers collapsed. That's pretty much it. That's what they are saying. The Attorney General is saying it's reasonable for the coroner to rely on the evidence that the Met Police produced. It's so laughable, it isn't funny because it's my brother's death and, it was a serious matter, but it's like the mind boggles as to how they can actually, just blatantly come out with that statement and think that's going to stand up if it's legally scrutinized, because it won't, and like I said, the reasons why they backed down pretty quick last September was because we just pulled them apart in their, the response that they gave us. It's not reasonable to rely on that evidence because the evidence that was given had no bearing on my brother's death. It's so ridiculous.
Yeah, well, police can't be experts on everything. Nobody expects the police to be engineers and be able to forensically analyze, how these towers came down. And so if the police refuse to acknowledge it, and the thing is, and I'm not making accusations about corruption or whatever, but there are corrupt police departments. So what's the recourse if you're dealing with one and they refuse to submit evidence, for something that they're trying to cover up? Does the average citizen have an ability to present evidence outside of the filter of the Met Police Department? It doesn't make any sense to me. All right. So you also wrote in the statement, as for the response to our claim that there is new evidence not heard at the first inquest, the Attorney General's new decision abandons the demonstrably irrational reasoning set forth in the first decision and now relies on the sweeping, unsubstantiated assertion that the evidence we presented in our 2,500-page application is not credible. Now, did they make any attempt at all to defend this claim that the evidence wasn't credible, or did they just state that without further explanation? Because we have run into this so much. Like I said, we have a government of frat boys reading cue cards. They say it's not credible. You ask them why, and their jaws hit the ground, and an aide ushers them away. Have they made any defense of this claim that it's not credible, or did they just say it in a sweeping statement?
There's no defense. It is just a sweeping statement, talking in very general terms. And then what's really bizarre is they then shoot themselves in the foot and say that they aren't going to assign any of their own experts, or didn't assign any of their own experts to look at our evidence because they've said it's not credible. It's almost, I mean, it's laughable that this is A, how they operate, and B, they think this is a reasonable, professional, lawful, rational response, because it isn't. And it'll easily be taken apart should we be granted the judicial review. That's why, they're just kicking the can down the road. I don't understand why they would do this. If they wanted to kill it, well, they need to come up with something way stronger than what they're doing. So apart from the obstacles they place in front of us, which is primarily money and a shortened time frame to go and do this in, the arguments they put forward aren't going to win. They won't stand up in a court of law.
So basically, they just say you're not credible. It's like calling you a name. It has no power to it. The only power they have is the legal power. I always thought tyranny had to be somewhat reasonable and realistic, but now as I get older, I'm finding, it's like a cement wall buried underground. You can dig maybe 3-4 inches, and then you hit it, and they will rationalize in any way they can. They'll bend the laws of physics. They'll bend the rules of logic. They don't even have to make sense as long as they can get through the moment and rely on nobody challenging them. But we're challenging them, and we got a great audience out there who's going to help us do that. All right. So you also wrote, in an attempt to justify summarily dismissing the new evidence, the decision states that the Solicitor General was unable to conceive what additional benefit Al-Qaeda or indeed any other malignant actor would gain by planning explosives, and he therefore considers the hypothesis we advanced to be fanciful. Now, this just seems like a speculative opinion of the Solicitor General. My understanding is that somebody who is in that position actually has to look at evidence, not just, sound like a guy at the bar shooting his mouth off. Al-Qaeda wouldn't do that. All right, but that's what this exactly sounds like. Did they address any of this evidence at all, or is this all just going to be based on the, again, speculative opinion of the Solicitor General?
No, I mean, they clearly haven't engaged at all with any of our evidence for reason like I said. They can't, because if they do that, we will pull them apart. They then try to, this thing of they can't conceive of what additional benefit that Al-Qaeda or any other malignant actor would gain by planting explosives. I mean, Christ, on record, if you just take facts, in 1993, the World Trade Center was bombed. They tried to bring it down. Right. If you look back at any historical terrorist attack which involves the use of bombs or anything, any type of terror, there's typically a secondary explosive. It's common to do that. You lure all the first responders in. You maybe shepherd people to other areas, and then a secondary device goes off. This idea that it wouldn't be a benefit to them to actually bring down the towers is so ridiculous, because obviously, clearly, if you're a terrorist, you want to create terror. And you would have thought, actually, from the war on terror and how it was justified, you'd want more terror, because then you're going to respond in however you want. And it just, again, the language they're using is so wishy-washy and general. It's not specifically looking at anything in detail. They just can't conceive. That's just fanciful. We can't conceive of what benefit there would be of bringing down the towers. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Yeah. That is just a stupid statement that they've come out with.
Well, they're trying to put their minds, their themselves in the minds of terrorists, but it overlooks the elephant in the room, is that maybe there were other factors, other players involved other than Al-Qaeda. But they don't want to go there. No, I mean, again, it's just based off of a guy's opinion. It doesn't look like they looked at any evidence at all. And I'm bringing these points up because I'm trying to drive home that point for our audience. I want the world to see exactly what is going on here in the UK. And it's just another retelling of the same story that we have been running up against in different forms and different characters in different theaters, trying to get justice here in the United States. Again, it's a cement wall buried 4 inches under the ground. We can have shows like this. They can tamper with the algorithm, try to keep people from seeing it. We can commiserate in our groups, but that's as far as we are allowed to go. If you actually have a real legal challenge and they can't defend it, they will bend the rules of logic to keep you from going any further. But that doesn't mean you don't challenge it. And we're going to get into some of the rationale for continuing this important fight. I just want to know for you, again, it's been a long journey. Were you surprised at all by this decision, or did you have suspicions that they would pull this kind of thing leading up to it?
I mean, going back to that first decision, which was 22 months in the making. I mean, there was always a chance that we expected them, to basically say no the first time round. What did surprise us was when we did legally challenge them through that judicial review back in September, that they withdrew their decision. A tacit admission that basically, they messed up and they hadn't given any real arguments as to why we couldn't get my brother's inquest reopened. So yeah, this second denial, which it came quicker, 4 months instead of 22 months. I guess it's not surprising because I said it's just part of lawfare, but the fact that they haven't actually used any real new arguments to me is surprising, because they will lose for the reasons why we set out in the substantive grounds before, and they back down. It's going to be a similar situation. We're already confident in terms of the outline arguments that I know the barrister is going to make, in applying for a judicial review. Again, they aren't going to win. It's a very peculiar situation. And I said, for me, it's just part of lawfare. They're hoping to exhaust us effort, energy-wise and money-wise. That's the only thing I can see them doing. So, yeah, they know their arguments are rubbish, but they know that our only response, the only route we have, is to go down this judicial review again. Yeah, it's frustrating, to say the least.
Well, they're hoping we all just go away, that we all just move on and get tired with it. We got to go Rocky IV with this, go the distance and keep on slugging it out. And you're prepared to do that. I'm curious, though, you were talking about your barrister who's executing this entire initiative. What was his reaction to all of this? I mean, is he shocked by it, or did he anticipate that this would be a controversial and very stonewalling procedure that he's going up against?
And I can't quote him verbatim, but I mean, I think he was very, let's just say, professionally disappointed in their first response, because, apart from the fact, my father said it best. It looked like someone had rushed their homework and had submitted a one-page, piece of rushed homework. And I think he also said it was like, they hadn't even done like the first year at law school. It was that poor. And so I think my barrister was disappointed that, it just obviously they hadn't engaged in any part of the application. We don't think he was just told, right, you need to push this one off, get rid of it, get rid of the problem, whatever they were told to do. That's how he saw it. I think he was surprised, as we were as well, when they backed down under threat of litigation. That was a real kind of, it wasn't a victory in terms of we haven't got the inquest reopened, but it was a very clear win for us in that, they know they're operating on very, very, shaky ground. They should not be responding to our request in the way that they have. So I think we were all a little bit taken back with this latest response in January. Disappointed, frustrated again, but it's more of the same. And you kind of just scratching your head, apart from that endless, you need to keep raising funds kind of thing. Why would they do that? Now, we're in an interesting situation now where we think the initial withdrawing of the decision last year was probably the first time the Attorney General has ever done that under threat of litigation, of judicial review. We are 100% sure they aren't going to do it again, because that's then going to be such an over display of corruptness and within the Attorney General's office. I don't think they'll stand up to any sort of scrutiny by the press and by pressure put on by other people if they continue to play this game. Apart from the fact it's unreasonable to do that with a bereaved family, with what we're trying to achieve here. It's just, give real reasons as to why we can't have the inquest stop playing this game in the legal system that they appear to be playing. So yeah, I mean, if we do apply for judicial review and we are granted, we're pretty confident that we will win in the High Court and a new inquest will be granted. But there's all these little steps we have to go through. It's just frustrating.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that they reversed the decision and then they reinforce it again. This shows a government in chaos, justice system in chaos, a cover up unraveling, and this is exactly why we got to keep on pushing the button here, because again, force them to defend themselves with these ridiculous arguments that don't hold water. It just shows the system for what it really is. How's your family holding up throughout all of this? I see you in all the interviews and stuff, but I know your mom is involved and you have your brother as well and father. What was their reaction to the latest development, and how are they doing throughout all of the coverage and this entire journey?
Yeah, so like I said, my dad just was disappointed by that first response, just saying, you could see they don't care. They really don't care about our situation. I mean, for my dad and my brother Rob, they support what myself and my mum have been trying to do, and they're obviously part of the application. But they tend not to get involved either looking back or too much in terms of speaking out about what we're trying to do. They just like to remember my brother how he was, yeah. Whereas myself and my mum, we're the only ones that actually looked at his remains. Mum's always been interested over the years about certain aspects of the official narrative that there's clear holes in, and we're not just talking about the use of explosives here. And yeah, I mean, she knows that I'm going to carry on doing this, and she's glad that I am doing this for my brother Geoff. It seems unfathomable that we're now 20 or whatever it is, 3 years on, or coming up for 23 years. It's so ridiculous that there's still these efforts to try and block any sort of investigation, which would put cracks into the official narrative through the legal system. It's still being blocked. So yeah, I mean, we do okay. I do feel really sorry for my mum and dad. I've got kids myself. I can't imagine really what it's like for them to lose a child, so young. And they cope with things as best they can. And all of us, I think, just want this to be done. Get the inquest, have it. Whatever happens at that inquest, then fine. But to keep denying us when we know that initial inquest itself was a joke is just so unfair and frustrating.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to play devil's advocate on this. The fact that they still have to maintain this cover up, that they have to go to all these lengths to keep any kind of inquiry or inquest or whatever you want to call it, any kind of truth revealed about this 9/11 situation shows that it's still an important issue, that a revelation of what really happened on that day would have a huge impact on this world, on the powers that be. And they are terrified of this to the point where, they issue rulings like this that are absolutely ridiculous. Again, hoping that the Campbell family just goes away. They let this fall to the dustbin of history. Of course, we're not going to let that happen. I don't believe in no-win scenarios. I'm going to quote Captain Kirk there. So that's why you're on here today. We're trying to help you. I believe, I don't know pound to dollar conversion that well, but you need to get $76,000 preferably by March 1st. So your barrister has time to do the necessary work. So we have, again, they have a crowdfunder. The money goes directly to the Campbell family. If they're not able to raise the money in time, it gets refunded back, I understand, to the donors. So basically, to the goal or bust here. But we're going to be featuring that widget on our page, a link to their crowdfunder, so you can help out. I hope people have been scrolling it right now while they listen to this show. No matter what happens in the end, I know what my opinion is of this, but is this journey been worth the struggle? Why is it important to seek justice, even in an incredibly unjust world? We learn it to be as we get older and as we try to do things like this. Why do we still need to follow these things through to the end, no matter what happens?
I mean, you know, nothing I do is going to bring my brother back. It's not going to bring anyone back who died. For me, it's getting to the truth of what happened to my brother. You know, all attempts of litigation to try and find out what's going on, they're either being permanently stalled, and you know, all the legal cases that are still going on have their role. Even, you know, the trial down in Guantanamo Bay, the Saudi lawsuits, you know, there's 5 legal firms representing the thousands of families. They're all getting pushed down, you know, just kicked along the road. There might even be a plea deal done at Guantanamo Bay at some point. It will never go to trial. And I'm guessing that the Saudi lawsuits, most of that they'll be trying to settle out of court. Because again, you know, they don't want this going through the legal system. It's for me. I've seen something. I don't agree with it. I'm being continuously stonewalled and lied to by authorities, which I think, you know, essentially it's their job to do that. They're obviously protecting interests, you know, various interests, and you know, I just think I've got to do what I can to try and address that. And I have always known ever since, you know, way back when we had that first inquest, that this was my way in which I could use leverage as a family member, even though it's in the UK, to try and get a little crack into the official narrative, you know, into a court of law, which is, you know, whatever your views on the legal system, it is actually where most of the, you know, things are either settled one way or the other. You know, you just got to keep fighting, and yeah, there's corruption within that system, but it's the best tool that we've got. And so, you know, I'm going to keep fighting as long as I can. If we don't get granted judicial review, there is one little path we have, which is Court of Appeal, which at least is a different judge. But, you know, that really is the end of the road for me. I can't go any further. The only thing that I would hope would be is that other family members, if new remains are identified in the UK, have heard about what I'm trying to do, and then actually try and do it themselves, get that evidence into a court of law. But, you know, they've not really identified anyone new. It's like one a year now. It's like it's really trickled down to, you know, almost nothing. And so, yeah. So sorry, just one of the things I was going to say, which I think it was an earlier point, was you know, should we actually get a new inquest granted? What's interesting is all the other victims that were represented at that first inquest have the opportunity to get their own loved ones' inquests reopened. And I do know that there is some support from some of the UK families. They don't want to go public. So I'm just hoping if we at least get to that stage, you know, it will open the doors to other family members who, you know, are willing to just, okay, it's reopen old wounds, but it's to realize that there's a lot wrong with, you know, certain aspects of the official narrative that's been perpetuated over the last 23 years.
That was, excuse me, that was going to be my last question, is that, you know, would this open up the door for other British victims of September 11th at the World Trade Center? And you just answered that. So really, again, it is justice for everyone there who died on the site. And so this is so much bigger than just the Campbell family's journey and their goal of getting a new inquest into Geoff's death. This represents the entire 9/11 truth effort. That's why our supporters should help the Campbell family out, because just the story, just the unfolding story of this entire drama is important. It's important for history. It helps the next person who takes up this fight. And, you know, we're trying to document it here at 9/11 Freefall and at AE 9/11 Truth. But, you know, somebody could write a book about this in the future. And it's important for the future to know exactly what the people of this time had to deal with. And even if you can't get the system to acknowledge what is right in front of them, winning in the court of public opinion is just as important too. Just like when we did C-SPAN, you know, we call in, confront the politicians. We knew what the politicians would say, but the important thing is the audience is watching. They're seeing these ridiculous interactions, and that has an impact. It trickles down through the populace and changes how it thinks and affects future events. So that is why we need to continue to support efforts like these. Matt, thank you so much for doing what you are doing. Folks, if you want to donate to the Campbell family, follow the link that's going to be in the bulletin and article at ae911truth.org. We got to try to get them, I think, $76,000 by March the 1st. Last time I looked, I don't remember the dollar amount, but it said something like you were 20% there. Let's see if we can put them over the top. But thank you, Matt, and we'll keep our audience updated on your fight.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, I hope we carry on fighting. We can win it.